In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, everyone would have a Merry Christmas. I used to work when I was in seminary with a guy named Harry Batuius, family friend, great guy. We painted houses, and I made a little money that way while I was living in Boston, studying to become a priest. And whenever I would mess something up on a job, and I'd say, well, if it had just happened that way, or but, he would say to me, Bus, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, then everyone would have a Merry Christmas. And isn't it true that we have such an abundance of reasons, and some of them real reasons, why we don't do the things with our lives that we want to do? Isn't that true? St. Paul, when he writes in his letters, he says, I do not do that what I want to do, and I do that which I do not want to do. This tendency among human beings to get sidetracked, our tendency to get our priorities mixed up, our tendency to make excuses for ourselves, that's what Jesus is talking about in today's parable. And it's the parable of the banquet. Jesus says there was a landowner, a wealthy man, and he prepared a great banquet. He was going to throw a big party. And when everything was done, the streamers were hanging from the ceiling, the foods were coming out of the oven, the waiters were lined up, he sent his servants out to tell all the invitees that the party was ready. And one after another, they begin to make excuses. Oh, I just bought oxen. I have to take care of them. I picked up this piece of land. I have to go sign the papers. Oh, I have this, I have that. And he's got no one coming to his party. So he says to the servant, the story, go out into the, highways and the byways and find the blind and the lame. Find the people who were never invited to this party and let them come in and let my house be filled. And then he goes on to say, as for those who were invited, they will never taste of my banquet. Right? They will never taste of my banquet. And there are lots of different readings of this parable. What's the banquet? What's this? What's that? I think the most useful reading of the parable, though, for us today in the 21st century is that we are the invitees. We have been invited. Jesus has extended an invitation to you. And the question posed by the parable is, how will you respond, and what will that mean for you? How will you respond, and what will that mean for you? So, the invitation is right there. All you have to do is look at the altar, and I know that oftentimes I step away and just point to that icon of the crucifixion. But truly and honestly, the invitation is right there. God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him will not perish, but have life eternal. Now, we can rephrase it. If I were reading it for myself, I could say, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that Father Constantine would not perish. You could read it that William will not perish. And you could read it that Ileana will not perish. This is a deeply personal invitation. There was a chasm between God and man, created by sin. God in the Garden of Eden created Adam and Eve that they would be in communion with God. And when sin was introduced to the world through the lies of the devil and the temptations of human beings, what happened is there was a chasm that was created between us. But God loved us so much, even though we betrayed Him, He did not want to let that chasm remain. He wanted to fill that space. He wanted to reestablish intimacy and solidarity with us. And He did that by being born, a human being. And not being born in any way. Being born into poverty, with no bed, using a trough as a crib, with parents who were far away from home. So He didn't just want to create intimacy and solidarity with us when we were in good shape. He wanted to create intimacy and solidarity with us even in our suffering, even in our darkest hours, even when we were totally dejected, totally depressed, totally broke, totally betrayed. Jesus is right there with us. So He is inviting us to a life of intimacy with Him. That's your invitation. Stavrula, He's invited you to a life of intimacy with Him. The invitation's out there. Now the question is, how am I going to respond to that invitation? It would be so easy for me to make excuses. Papadas, right? That stuff is for the priests or for the yayas. Right? Aren't these the things we tell ourselves? I'm going to start going to church real regular once my kids are older and I've retired and I have a little bit more time. I can't really understand the theology of the church. All that stuff is above my level. I promise you there's so many things that everybody understands. The 12 disciples were in fact illiterate fishermen. Yet they were able to hear the teachings of Jesus and live in intimacy and solidarity with Him. Right? So there are a myriad of excuses that we can make for ourselves when we receive this invitation from Jesus. We can just simply say, it's not for me, it's for other people. We can say, I don't have the time. We can say, I don't have the intellectual capacity. We can say, oh, well, the church is antiquated, it's outdated, blah, blah. We can go through all of these things, or we can respond with an affirmative RSVP. And if we want to respond to Jesus with an affirmative RSVP, and I used to preach about these three things every single Sunday, but I'm going to preach about them again. I've left them alone for a while, but I want you to remember, because I really think these are the three major pillars upon which any Christian life really rests. That means we want to be people of prayer, we want to be people of fasting, and we want to be people of good works. We should be praying every day. Every day we should be taking time. Maybe it's in the morning, maybe it's in the evening, whether you're up before everybody else or up after everybody else, or whether you can get a break in the middle of the day. But each and every one of us should have a few minutes each day that we can dedicate to prayer. Prayer shouldn't be something we do on Sundays. Prayer is something we should do every single day. The church has fast periods. We should try our best to observe those to the best of our ability, because what that does is it reminds us that we need God more than we need food, that we need the spiritual more than we need the material. It makes us thankful for our blessings, right? And Jesus said, you can pray and fast all you want. I can speak with the tongues of angels, but if I don't have love, then it's nothing. It's not worth anything. So we have to love each other, and loving each other is not only about our feelings towards one another. It's about our actions towards one another. Right? And as a matter of fact, God tells us to love even those who we don't feel for, to love those we hate, to love those who are enemies, to love those who don't deserve it. Right? So we need to be people of prayer, fasting, and good works. Right? That's how we respond to the Lord's invitation. And what is the banquet? What is it that we get when we RSVP? What is it that we get when we go to this party? We actually get two parties, believe it or not, because it profoundly enriches our life here on earth. When we're people of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, our lives take on substance. Our lives take on meaning. We get actually a hall pass away from the rat race, and we suddenly know what we're living for. Right? And yet, that's just a foretaste. That's just a foretaste of the sound and the feasting of the saints in heaven, into which we eternally enter when we pass from this life into eternal life. So, my prayer is that all of us will have far fewer ifs and far fewer buts, and without any candy or nuts, we will have the merriest of Christmases in the embrace of our newborn Lord. Thanks for your attention. I pray that God continues to bless and keep each and every one. Let us